Yeah, I wanted to talk about marriage versus kids. Scenarios where you are married with kids, married without kids, and what that looks like. Good morning. What up? What up, brother Wayne? Good morning. So, being married, I kind of realized something, and one of the things I realized is that I'm not ready to have another child yet. And I was just thinking about why. Because I have a an adult child from when I was very young. And I really didn't get the experience I wanted. So I'm open to having another child, but even at my age and even being married, like I'm still not ready. In a lot of different ways. And even though I wasn't ready to have a child when I was 18, you know, um, I just had to just adapt. And it made me kind of think about what is going on in our society, because a lot of younger men are not having children. I believe, yeah, there's more men without children than there are with women. And want to talk about like what's going on, and if you guys have any opinions, put them in the comments. um and so I titled the stream "Married Without Kids at Best," pretty much meaning that in a lot of situations, that might be the best a man can do, as far as trying to live, quote unquote, live right or live righteously. um I mean, let's talk about what's going on in different societies, not only in the U.S. but even in other cultures. Um, there's not a lot of men that are getting married. Um, you do have more men. You do have more men producing babies that aren't married. But we have this problem in society where we says that you know uh, two-parent households is better than one. We have studies that say a father being present in a young boy's life is better for his development. Even though statistics, history says, having children and having a two-parent household is the way to go. And also, men, we have a innate. There's something innate about us to want to create a legacy. All those things, um, all those things I mentioned, is still not motivating men to in general to not really want to have children these days. And so I'm evaluating different countries. I'm looking at how the dynamic is, and a lot of it is the same. A lot of it is the same, with a small exception. Brother Wayne said, "Good point," and I debate this concept every day. I have a similar situation with a young adult child. Yeah, it is, in a nutshell, having children in this societies today, regardless of the country, is a huge responsibility. It's a bigger responsibility than it was before. One thing I always say this, I say this to my mom, is that she raised three of us making $20,000 a year. What I mean, back then, and I was like, you know, and that was like a good year. And I was like, man, how was kids able to be raised more kids. My grandma had 10 kids. Now we were still considered, I guess, poor, but a lot of times we was able to kind of have basic things: a roof over our head, food to eat, whether it came from welfare, whatever the case may be. You know, um, a new pair of shoes, outfits before school year started, and maybe when your mom or something, when they get taxes, you might get some things during tax time. But that was pretty much it for a lot of us. And that was just considered normal. It was just considered normal. This was before child support, a quarter to child support. So a lot of our mothers, even fathers that working minimum wage jobs, people figured out how to do it. What's going on now is it's extra pressure. It's more pressure now having a child or wanting to have a child as a man. The financial situation, is still pretty much the same challenges. People living check to check. You know, life situations happen, et cetera, et cetera. So financially, most people in the world are in the same boat. You know what I mean? Struggling to get by. There's still government assistance out there, so kids can get food. Food from a government. People still get tax refunds and be able to do little things like that. But and those times was hard in itself. What a lot of women don't understand now is that on top of all the financial um, constraints that come with having children, men have to also deal with a different persona of a woman. Because I'm thinking about like, what is like really different now, and getting along, getting along with a woman is very difficult these days. Very, very difficult. It is very difficult. And, you know, men and women, broke up, and, there were, single moms created, etc. But men and women still got along to some point. At least the men that was trying to be active and contributing to that child. But now it's just that so many women, and this is like most of the world. This is not even like the Matrix. This is like most of the world. So many women, I see it in the Latin culture, um, African culture, Asian culture. When that child come, women become more and more angry, frustrated, a sense of entitlement, to the point of where even the even the man, even the greatest father, even the greatest father would experience agony dealing with an average mother as it pertains to raising the child. And so it's just too much weight. It's just too much stress to deal with having children. And those that appreciate those that's tuning in. Um, like I mentioned at the beginning of the stream, I'm married and I'm just not mentally ready to have children. It's hard enough to deal with, um, let's say, the emotions of my wife, or if we have disagreements. When you have a child, those things multiply 10 times over. That's why a child having a child increases the likelihood of divorce. statistically. Having a child decreases your happiness even more, you know. And so when you bringing a child in this world just basically adds extra stress, you know. And you know, some people say you have to have a overabundance of joy or happiness because a child and or a spouse will decrease that happiness. So you got to come in a situation like at 110% on the happy scale. You know what I mean? Because those things decrease it by nature. So what you see now, you know, in society is that a lot of people are not one not happy, and then you know bringing you know dealing with a woman, she's gonna bring your happiness down, and then having a child is gonna do it even further. So it's just I think men are at their peak of the amount of stress and tolerance that they can take. You know, that's why we have the red pill movement now. And some people feel like it's some extremism that could be going on, but in a nutshell, men are men are at their breaking point, with a lot of things going on, and so a lot of guys are just not comfortable shooting. Well, I don't want to say that, but you know, they pull out game is become have become a lot stronger. Has become a lot stronger. It's just a lot to deal with. Shout out to Rona Trials with Alex. He said, "What's good, Passport Bros podcast." For his son, the pressure was tremendous without being, man, I could just imagine. Four sons. Yeah, man. LOM says, if you get married, you're going to have trouble. Yes. Yep. That is, man. That brother knows that trouble in the flesh, man. Paul said marriage is trouble in the flesh. From the rip. From the rip. You know, it's it is. I've been researching a lot about Africa, Latin America. I've kind of got a hold on things culturally. Us in the passport world community, we advocate to explore your options overseas, whether it's marriage, dating, quality of living, investing, marriage, whatever. I will say, I think that guys might not experience too much difference if they want to have children outside anywhere for the most part. Because if you don't want to get married, that's fine. But you still want to have a seed, you know, dealing with women in most of these societies, women already have most countries, women get the benefit of the doubt with child custody anyway, right? So you don't really get nothing different than the US as far as natural, what they would kind of give natural rights to a woman, or she'll get the benefit of the doubt. There is some exceptions. I'm gonna mention those countries that's kind of more of exceptions, but most countries in the world, give the benefit of the doubt to the mother when it comes to that. So, most of us, and I'm generally speaking, most of us don't want to have to fight in court for anything, because that fight is typically associated with how much money you spend. And, a lot of men don't want their fate to be left in a judge's hand. At the minimum, they want at least for, themselves and the mother to be able to come to some agreement. But obviously, if you could come to an agreement with anything, you would still be with that person, or you would be with that person. So I think a lot of men are at the point where we feel too, we feel too powerless to have children. I know some men may rebuke the word men being powerless, but I'm just speaking in the sense of how the law restricts us from enforcing our power. Naturally we can invoke our power physically. That's always been a natural threat, is our physicality and our and the bass in our voice. So we don't really have that power, what I mean, to enforce or control anything, to be a father, you know. Even back in the days, even deadbeat fathers still had something to say about their kids, you know. And most of the time, a woman had to, she respected, she still respected what he said, even if he was a deadbeat or not. But now, women are empowered, especially in westernized societies, to not even, respect you just as a father, whether you are a active father or not active father. So it's just too much. It's just too much. It's just too much of a lack of respect for the the title of father, that men just don't want to take no more. Just don't. And so I had made a post yesterday about I made a community post yesterday about, married without kids, or having kids out of or just having kids without marriage. Because right now, how I feel like both. I feel like marriage with kids is just it's. I feel like it's too much. And some of the guys that I know that's married now, they're not having kids, or their wife already had kids, or they got kids and they good. I haven't seen too many guys, at least in my, at least my peers that's married, that's having kids, or at least kids right away. Financially, but this is another burden women put on men too. They put on, if we have a child, I want my child to have A, B, C, and D. Ronan Trials with Alex said recent laws in PA, Tennessee, Texas, Florida, and list as growing men are becoming powerful in child custody. That's a good thing. It has to happen if we're gonna restore the family. You know what I mean? Or have some type of balance in society. We can't have a society that's just dominated by women raising boys. And so we have to balance that by having, if it's going to be single fathers, it got to be a balance of single fathers too, to balance that out. But the other challenge is, besides dealing with um, a more moody, angry, attitude-filled mother, even if even if y'all do get along or have a good relationship, the financial component. What I've noticed, um, interacting with women, whether it's in Latin America, parts of Africa, in general, women want. I mean, men do too. I mean, women want what they did. Women want for their kids what they didn't have, but to the extreme in a lot of cases. Um, a lot of times, two people, struggling, that they have, they have a child, and they do what they can for their child. There's no pressure on saying, I gotta have this type of house. My kids gotta go to this type of school. We got to take this money trips in a year. That's the pressure. And I'll speak for myself. I don't want nor like that type of pressure. It's like not only do I have to provide, pay the bills, make sure you good. Now if we have a child, this child gotta have a certain lifestyle or you pissed off. Men. This is my opinion. I don't like the pressure that women put on men as far as lifestyle goes. Um, I don't really want to, bring up when I was a young father, but it was a situation where I believed in buying my son maybe two pair of shoes in a calendar year. Because boys don't need to be. I didn't grow up like that. That's my mentality. And I remember his mom saying, I don't know if she was joking or serious, but she was saying like, I had like 10 pair of shoes. I'm like, 10 pair of shoes in a year. I'm like, who does that? She was dead serious. Now, girls, I mean, I don't want to say girls is different, but you can buy girls some sandals, some flip flops, some cheap shoes. It's a little girl shoes or female shoes, like they like to switch stuff up. She might got some sneakers or something to play in, something for church, or whatever the case may be. But boys typically we typically wear some type of sneakers and 10 pairs. That's almost like a pair of shoes every month, almost every other month. And those are the type of things that make or break relationships between the mother and father. Is her expectations is way off base than a man expectations. And I know a lot of men can attest to this. I know a lot of men can attest to this. A lot of women, let's talk about school. You see when women divorce or they break up, especially dudes that got money, the first thing they say is, child education expenses. And you looking at yourself like, shit, I was raised fine. I turned out fine at this public school. Now, I mean, yeah, if you could comfortably pay for private education, so be it. Um, dudes literally uh pay more in child support because of school and education that he really can't afford. But either he's pressured into doing it or forced into doing it. And it's women make it hard. Women make it harder to want to be fathers with that. Because they not only got to deal with your attitude, I got to deal with all this all this money you want me to spend to make this child look like he's Prince Harry or something like that. And I'll be honest, like you know, even I think my wife, for example, I know she hasn't said it, but I know having a child, I know she expects a certain lifestyle. I think I mentioned about I mentioned about traveling. So this is last, this is not really serious, but I mentioned about traveling. And what up, word to man of tomorrow? Was good, bro? I mentioned about traveling. I was like, we don't have kids now, so I could, afford to take you with me to go to different continents, you know, things a little further out. And I was like, I was like, we ain't gonna be able to travel like this with a kid. And she like, why not? I'm like, that's a third flight ticket. And she had an attitude because she like, well, you saying this without. She basically saying like you're limiting our our future child, so to speak. Like you're already limiting without even knowing what our situation is going to be. And I'm just like, why? I guess we don't we won't see eye to eye on that. Now, yes, should you take family trips? Yes, if you can afford it. Um, is it good for a child to experience different countries? Yes, but is it necessary to spend $5,000 to $10,000 every year to go to Australia or somewhere that's just kind of far to travel? I don't think it's necessary. I don't even think it's wise to do that. But women have in their mind what they want their children to experience. And so a man like, man, if this is how you feel or think or want, I don't even want to even sign up for that 18-year contract, because that's what it is, an 18-year contract. Let me catch up on some of these comments real quick. Maternity fraud, mandatory DNA test, withholding visitation by the mother. The father is finable up to $1,000 of jail time. That's good. One night stands and getting pregnant is not on father for paternity. Okay. Line on paternity, the woman is responsible for paying the father back or go to jail. That's fair. He said Texas just passed 774 laws on September 1st. On is a state marriage bill, which gives you tax advantages. Okay. Yeah, I mean, those are we still have a long way to go. We have a cultural thing. I mean, I think the only thing that's gonna combat the financial expectations on a child is for men to have a 50-50 shot at custody. Eh, but at the same time, it's just not in a man's nature to fight in court for his child. It doesn't make logical sense to us. It's like, this is my damn child. Why I got to go to court for it? So even if the rights do become more equal, I think it's still going to be a challenge for men to want to enforce their rights. That's a big cultural thing. You know what I mean? For a man to say, all right, let me file this petition. Maybe you need to get an attorney. It's a lot. Women don't have to do that. A lot of women, they could get custody by default. Now we have some by default measures, then that's different. Men don't want to have men in general don't want to have to fight to do that. It's just not in our nature. Shout out to Buck Travel. He said no excuse cooking this morning. Yes, sir. Ronan said Florida has that 50-50 rule. Oh, that's what I'm talking about. Automatic. That's what I'm talking about. Automatic. Somebody writing those legislation was thought this out. That's what needs to go on. But now let's talk about abroad. Now, I don't know if any countries have the similar issues or if they're moving in a similar direction. But I know, especially like some of the third world countries, if you want to say, I would say some of the less economic countries, they are, you know, the woman is de facto, custodial parent, unless it's determined in court. So I'll say this: the benefit of having a child in wedlock is that in the event when you break up, or in this case the divorce, you have to work that out anyway. That's part of the divorce proceedings, is all right, what are we gonna do about this child? So the man has an advantage in that situation because the divorce forces you to talk about those situations, and typically a judge establishes things fair anyway. I would say this: men get more, um, men get more when it comes to their children if they were married and got divorced than a man that never was married and trying to go to court. So men have a better leg to stand on being married. I will say that. However, however, I can't speak on this because I've never been down that road before. But when you have a child in wedlock and you go through a divorce proceeding, typically divorces take longer because somebody wants out, and the kids are figuring out that makes the divorce proceedings longer. You can't get no rapid divorce if there's kids involved for the most part, because you're going to disagree on something. That is why some men that are married are not in a rush to have kids, because it's like, it is, you know you might be dealing with somebody, you might be dealing with somebody that's difficult to deal with, so you like adding a child is just not gonna it just don't make any sense. Now, one thing that I discovered talking to some people from West Africa, I want to see if it's like Nigeria or Ghana, or maybe both. But I remember this lady was telling me that, I think I interviewed this lady. She said that in the United States, she had a child with a West African man. He took their child to Africa, and she wanted to be with her child, so that's how she ended up moving to, I want to say Ghana or something like that. Because those men, they don't play about their kids, and I didn't know that in some of these West African countries, men get custody when, you know if you break up. Like, the laws the laws favor men so much, and it's so patriarchal, that in West Africa, men get custody of the kids. When it comes to inheritance, typically the inheritance goes to the son and not the daughter. And so you got women in West Africa saying they not really pressed about having children because, um if they have a daughter, because the women thinking about themselves, and they thinking about the female code and female nature. So it's like, if I have a daughter and she has a brother, it's not fair that the inheritance don't split between both of them. It goes to the boy. And then it's other examples too, where boys kind of get treated, better, or get the, treated better, whatever you want to call it. Whether it's right, whether it's tradition, that is part of a patriarchal society. And we already know what's going on in a matriarchal society. A lot of times little girls get treated better, um, or the big sister or little sister uh, demasculates her brother. Because some cultures, the daughter, the sister got to serve the brother, or show deference to the brother. So what I'm saying is, yes, if you was living in West Africa, or part of that culture, or that type of patriarchal culture, then yes, having children, you don't even think about, you just have them, because you have all the cards. You have all the cards. But unfortunately, Most countries are not like at West Africa. I don't know any other cultures that that's kind of like it. I think maybe I've heard of some either in the Arab or Middle East. I'm not sure. Um, but yeah, I know West Africa. Men don't really have issues as far as with their kids is concerned. They get the custody. Those women don't. And correct me if I'm wrong. Those women don't really, especially Nigeria. Those women don't really talk slick like that, or challenge men like that in the country like Nigeria. Let's see. Rona Trials with Alex said, I've been working on this topic for a podcast. Okay. He said, it is documented. It is a documented fact now. One of three fathers are not the biological father. They were being lied on or wrongfully named to child support service by the mother. Yeah, that's crazy. And then you got women out here that balk at the idea of mandatory DNA testing. Buck Travel said the courts, government make money off divorces, child custody, etc. Profit. Yeah, it is. It is a lot of money. It is a lot of money in that. It's just so much. Um, but in a nutshell, this is probably why back in back in I would say like mid I don't back in like probably medieval times where when it was monarchs and peasants where the government kind of had control, like certain people probably couldn't even have kids. Like you probably had to have money to have kids. You had to have money to get married. I think I seen a stream Lapeef was having about or Anton, one of them. They was talking about marriage is only rich people should get married. Um, and it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense because most women feel like they're better off alone if it's not a good deal. So if you're not in the top 10%, maybe 5%, depending on the woman, marriage isn't a marriage for what? It's not it's not attractive. So what am I saying? Women are demanding a certain level of finances when it comes to marriage. They're expecting a certain level of finances when it comes to having a child. So most men are average. Most men are average earners. Historically, men without means didn't get married. Historically, men without means did not have children. What we're doing now is I would say men not getting married is normal. People make it a big thing like it's something different. That's been historical. We just have more marriages because we've had the largest middle class in civilization history. So we were just an anomaly, but men marriage was not something normal. Having kids back at those times wasn't normal either. So um the baby making is the baby making by men is more of a modern thing of anything. If you want to compare, birth rates and things of that nature. So I'm not saying men shouldn't be thinking about having babies or having babies, but I want men to understand, and some men do understand. I want men to really, you know, think about like is having children should be even an option now. Um, Now the laws, Rona trials, what Alex brought up, that's promising. The laws that's promising. Um, for those respective states, what happens when you move to a different state, Alex? What happens when you move to a different state? certain countries, you know, guys not going to be really moving to different countries to have children. It's just not practical. And then even if you had a child from a woman from a particular country where she's from a, where she, where it's a patriarch, if you brought her here, that dynamic changes. The dynamic changes from a patriarch to a matriarch. And if you are a long distance dad, you know, you're not really being there to raise the child. You may have say, depending on, you may have say so. Um, Maybe she might not have the financial expectations, but now if you have a son, you're not raising him. So now you're part of the problem. So it's just, that's why I said marriage at best, because right now, if you're trying to do do the right thing or righteous thing, and some people look at marriage as the right thing to do, you just can't really go no further than that in today's climate. you know and if you want to have a child, you kind of weighing options, like, do I want to have a child out of wedlock so I don't have to deal with this if we have a divorce? But if you're married, you get more rights. So there's all these things that's juggling, and it's just too much because it's no black and white. There's no black and white. So let's see. Keith and Jay said Dame Lillard, a top 1% man, and just filed for divorce. Marriage is cooked in the West, period. Yeah. The West is, Latin America is the West too, for you guys listening. Just trust me on that one. Ron Travels with Alex, he said, I have pushback on the historical part. It was advantageous to have more children due to death, sickness, working the land, the harshness of crime back then. That's why family. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you. I see what you're saying. My grandma had 10 kids. A lot of people, grandmas and great grandmas, had a lot of kids. But like I said, for men getting these women pregnant, it wasn't a burden. It wasn't a burden on them to produce them children. It wasn't a level. Like I said, my grandma definitely didn't have no child support system enforcing putting the pressure on men. Men should be responsible. That's not what I'm trying to say, but pressure. Some men didn't sign up for the pressure. Whether they should have pulled out, that's a different conversation. Some men didn't sign up for the pressure. Some men just can't handle that type of pressure. And so when I say men were having less babies back then, I think it's still true. My grandma had 10 kids by 7 different men. And those 7 different men had children with different women. So it was still Pookie and Ray Ray getting all the chicks pregnant. It still was the same dynamic. But from a world scale, um, I think people were having less. I think people were having less children 1,000 years ago. There were, I would say, there's the ones that were having children probably had bigger families, but I still think I still think that men were having less children 1,000 years ago, maybe 500 years ago. I just think the ones that was married, because you had to because even back in the 1900s, early 1900s, like one, if you got a girl pregnant, you was pressured to marry her, or if you wanted to have children, you had to seek a wife, which most men wasn't getting married in the first place. So that's kind of where I'm going with that. Let's say, plus it was good for the rich to have laborers and to fight wars. It was definitely cheaper to have kids back then. Most grew and cooked their own food, so it was cost effective. Yeah, it was cost effective. But like I said, even back in the day for our ancestors, marriage was required. Marriage was required. So, a man that wasn't married was not having children, or it wasn't that high. It wasn't that, it wasn't a lot of men unmarried having children. I think that's the biggest difference. Having children out of wedlock is wide open now. Um, and even if men aren't required to get married because married puts pressure on men. Men are realizing now, like, it's just pressure dealing with the woman. It's pressure with her financial expectations of a child. So, and then we're having children under a matriarchal world. This When it comes to children, the world is matriarchal predominantly, outside of like a few countries. So I don't know. I'm still trying to you know figure it out, do things the right way, and some men might have to live with the reality of not having children. Um, some women too, because they can't find a man that want to produce to them. So